I know what you're probably thinking here by taking a look at this lovely piece of wood with ants and leaves and a hole that goes all the way through it. What in the world is he up to? I'm going to take this old piece of rotten wood that I dug out of a burn pile and I'm going to make something cool out of it. First, I guess I probably should have done this before I drug it out of the weeds, getting poison ivy and chiggers and ticks and whatever. I need to see how much of this is actually good wood. I'd be wasting my time and making a mess. But oftentimes, even the outer parts of the wood may be rotten. If this had heart content in it, the insides are perfect. I never like to judge a board by its cover. And this cover is pretty rough. See, that sounds pretty solid. Of course, that doesn't. Big hole. Really only one way to find out. So that's what I would look like with the mustache. So you may be asking yourself, why am I sanding this rotten piece of wood? Well, it's not all rotten. I just need to find out what's underneath of all of this dirt, grime, dust, whatever. Once I get that 200 years of dirt off of it, I'll know a little bit more about what I'm working with. I found a big hole. See it right there? Okay, that's no good. All jokes aside, of course I'm gonna have to cut this off. This sounds pretty stable. I won't know until I cut into it. And this end is actually, there's probably about a foot of material there that's pretty decent. I'm really not sure what I would actually use it for, but I'll still cut it off and save it. I'm gonna go ahead and cut these ends off, cut this bad part out, and we'll see what we're left with. Piece of art, wall art. Bad parts are cut off, or at least the bad parts that I'm aware of. This is what I'm left with. A little over 3 feet. Ends look pretty good and solid from here. Also have this little chunk here that's about a foot long. Nope, no good. See that rotten part at the top and how it comes all the way down into here? It's really not worth messing with. So garbage. Doesn't look like it travels any further than that into the wood. This side here is actually in pretty decent shape. This is the end that I cut off, and that's what it looks like on the inside. And now the most important question: what kind of a project should I build? I really want to push the boundaries with this one. All right, I think that I have found what I want to build. Okay, so this double rocker has been on my family farm since I can remember. So this thing is super old. And I've always been intrigued by its simplistic design and how this thing has actually withstood the test of time. So I'm going to attempt to take what's left of that old rotten board, and I'm going to see if I can replicate this thing. And there's only one way to find out. If I have enough material, once I have all of my parts cut, I'll tell you the dimensions of every part during the assembly. And if this thing turns out to be as awesome as I think that it will in my head, then I'll make sure to make up a set of plans for this and throw it on my website. So this is a perfect example of what I was talking about by not judging a book by its cover, yada yada, true beauties on the inside. Do you remember what this looked like? On the outside, that's what it looked like. But about 1/4 of an inch deep, you have this. So don't smash your finger, just like I did. So there's still some bad spots in this. There's some cracks, that I'm going to have to work around. Of course, these bolt holes. Overall, this is a solid, nice piece of wood that just happened to be covered with pretty rough outside. I think it's going to be gorgeous. Let's just see if I can get the parts that I need out of it. So with what I have figured out, the widest parts that I'm going to be needing for this project are going to be 3 inches wide. Most of the rest of the parts are, 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and bust this down into 3-inch blocks just to make it a little bit more manageable. If you do not have a bandsaw, you can actually do this with a circular saw. You can do this with your table saw. It's just going to take a couple of cuts and flipping the board over. Okay, so now that I have my material cut down to manageable size, cleaned up, I mean, this is some gorgeous stuff. Still have to watch out. There's the outside of this piece. Looks like these cracks, they only go down about another 1/4 of an inch, so that shouldn't be a problem. But problem that I have to watch out for now is the bolt holes. Almost every part that I'm going to be needing is going to be right around 3/4 of an inch. Might be able to get 2 pieces out of this side if I'm lucky. This side I should be able to get 2 and 1 on this side. This piece here was kind of the off piece. By the time I cut that out, we're only going to be left with about 25 inches. Might be able to use this for the arms. I'm going to get rid of these notches just to square everything up. Then we'll start cutting some strips. Fingers crossed. Now that the notches are gone, let's go ahead and see if we can get 3/4 inch material out of this. Like what you just seen, if you cannot cut all the way through the material, you can always flip it over, run it twice. I have laid out the parts and the measurements that I think that I'm going to need based on the lengths that I can get from these bolt holes, the parts, and it looks like I may have enough. It's going to be very close, like I can't mess up. Mistakes were made. These thinner boards that I set aside, that were kind of trimmed off, they're going to come into play. We're going to need them because it's going to be tight. So now that I have everything kind of laid out, let's start cutting some parts. So now to this point, I've taken that rotted timber and cut it down into usable 3/4 of an inch material. And because I cannot mess up, I will be cutting one part at a time, and some will have to be cut down to smaller sizes. The one thing that I do know for sure is that if I come up one board short, I don't have any other material that will match this to replace it. So I can't mess up. Okay, so I'm down to my last part, and this has been like working a jigsaw puzzle to try to get all of this out of the material that I had. But let me show you what I've got so far. These are my parts. Should be, except for one slat that I need. So I need one more of these. So I'll show you what I've got left to work with. This is my scraps. Part of this material will actually have this emerald color in it, and part of it will be kind of clear. But it's going to be cool regardless. This piece is busted up, so it's not good for what I need. And that leaves us with this. Of course, none of this stuff's going to work. I'm hoping, this is my only hope, is that I can get that last board out of here. Okay, so I actually went back and recounted. So I need to get 2 boards that are 18.5 by right around 1/4 of an inch thick for these back slats. Don't have much to work with here. Fingers crossed, really crossed. Go trim this to size. This is what I came up with. One of these slats are actually a little bit thin. One's right on the money. I'm gonna have to work with it. Maybe I can put this one kind of on the outside or something like that, but we've got our parts. So let's get to putting this thing together. Okay, so I have most of my parts cut. There's still a couple more that I'm going to have to add some different shapes to. Either jigsaw or bandsaw this stuff out, but it's going to be the rockers. These arms of the back, so I have to be cut a little bit. The actual backrest is at an angle, so I'll have to cut that. I'm going to go ahead and start off by getting these rockers cut. And since I have the old one here, I really don't want to take the whole thing apart. It's not much as far as use, but it's still, a decorative piece. I'm just going to kind of trace these rockers out and go from there. So the idea is to go ahead and get this part cut and then copy this onto my second one. So we'll see, or I may cut them both at the same time. All right, so as I go on through this build, I will tell you what the dimensions of all the lumber is. Stuff like this, I'm not going to be able to tell you what the exact dimensions are for this arch. Just know that this board is 3 inches wide and it is 29.5 inches long. You may have to get a little creative with your arch, or if you decide to buy the plans, I'll actually have a printable template for this. So what I'm going to do, I've decided to cut them both at the same time. The parts that I will not be needing, like, all of this, I'm actually going to screw these 2 boards together. Because for one thing, I want my rockers to match. And I can't afford to mess up. If I mess up one of these parts, it's pretty much done. All right, so I'm going to be making this cut with a jigsaw. Yes, I have some other tools that I could use, but just wanted to show you that jigsaw can do a lot of things. In my opinion, the most underrated tool in a workshop. This is what we have ended up with. Left just a little bit of extra meat there. There's a couple of different ways that you can clean this up so it rocks nicely. You can use a flush trim bit on a router table, or you can even use an oscillating sander. You really just want to be able to lay this flat and kind of shape this edge. Have my rockers cleaned up, and I was actually able to do this with just a sander. Everything was close enough to the original that just took a little bit of sanding just to get rid of a couple marks in the jigsaw and a couple high spots. So now that we have our rockers made, let's go ahead and cut these arms out. Just an FYI on these arm parts, they're 2 1/4 wide by 20 1/4 long. Again, I'm just going to kind of trace what this old one has, and cut it out with a jigsaw. So we'll get those arms cut, but while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and mark out these back supports. These are 1.25 inches wide by 27.25 long, and it's going to be these parts here. Basically, we just have to copy this angle here. So to do that, I'm just going to measure up. We'll measure up on our parts 5 inches and then mark that angle because it's a straight angle. That's what that'll need to be. And again, that's 5 inches up. Then we'll cut our angles that actually go onto our rockers here. Let me get these cut real quick. Be right back. The back supports here. Got that angle cut. Again, that was 5 inches up, straight down to the corner. And the two arms, I told you the dimensions of those, but this is 3 3/4 and then 7/8 from the thinnest. So it's just a 3 3/4, start at 7/8, arch over. Did that with the jigsaw. So now for our legs. So the length of these leg boards, they're 2 inches wide by 19.5. So now we need to put the angles onto our legs. For this, we're going to have to separate our legs out into the front legs and back legs. We're going to have different angles on different sides so that everything fits. And the two ends that are going to have to be against the curved rocker part, I'm going to give you a close angle, but you may have to do some hand sanding just to get that arch worked in. So for the two front legs, I'm going to put a 4-degree angle on each side facing into each other, kind of like a V. And then for our back legs, I'm going to put a 4-degree angle on one side. That's going to be the side that sits on the rocker. And the other side, I'm just going to leave square. All right, let's put this thing together. So we're going to need our rockers, our legs, and our arms. So before I start assembly, I'm going to get all of my parts sanded. This is where you can fine tune the fit of the legs and also knock off any sharp edges for the arm parts. Okay, so once we have all of our parts sanded down and ready to assemble, front leg is 1 inch back, and then the back leg will be 15 1/4. There's several different ways that you can attach these legs. Actually, on this old one that I'm looking at, they actually just use nails. I'm not just going to use nails. Now, I could use dowel joinery for this, but what would make it a little more difficult is the arch of these legs. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to mark the outsides of my legs onto the rocker itself. Then I will counterbore from the bottom, use wood glue, and insert screws. And then once I'm done with all of this, I can put a dowel plug into my counterbores. I'll be placing 2 screws from the bottom and 1/2 inch in and centered from each edge. Okay, so now that we have our rockers attached to our legs, it's going to attach our arms. This arched part will actually be where it'll be attaching to our backing. So this is the front, and I want 1.25 inch overhang. So now I'm just going to mark this, and I'll also mark the back. So technically this will be the underneath of the arm that we've marked. Just like we did for the bottom, I'm going to put 2 screws in each one, and I'll be placing those 1/2 inch in from each side. And then since this material is 3/4 inch thick, I'm going to center this at 3/8. Once I have this marked, I'm just going to pre-drill these. That way I can actually see where I need to counterbore from the top without having to remeasure. And since both of these legs are the same, I'm going to take both of my arm pieces, pre-drill through both of these. So from the opposite side, you can see where we have actually came out with our pre-drill. Now I'm going to counterbore these. Now that we have our counterbores in place, I'm going to pre-drill into the top of my leg. So now I'll just glue it up and install my screws. All right, so we are getting closer. I'm actually really liking how this is going to turn out. Once we have both of our rockers done, or the legs done, I'm going to set them aside at this point, because if you actually look at this old one, the sides are made as one unit, and then the seat's made as one unit, and then the back. They're all made separately. And then they're actually bolted together right here. That's what we're going to do. So next I'm going to be making the seat for this thing. In order to do that, I need to make these 2 outside edges. I'm essentially going to make a box. I put the front and the back on, the 2 supports, and then our slats. So the slat supports that I'm about to cut look like this. It has this profile. So I'll have to figure out what that profile is, copy that onto my 2 end boards, which they're going to be 2 3/4 by 13 7/8. And then the 2 center supports, they're actually nested inside. You can see there's quite a bit of overhang there. They're really only going to need to be 2 inches by 13 7/8. Okay, so in order to find this profile here, I could actually just freehand it, but what I'm going to do is just take a piece of our very little scrap that we had. I'm going to place it inside. I'm going to trace the template of the seat and then put that on the top and then transfer that onto the tops of my seat supports. Right, so this is the profile of this, or you can make your own profile and pretty much have any type of design that you want. Again, this is just going to be the top. Okay, we have our two very end boards. One thing to note on these 13 and 7/8 boards, because the front legs are at a 4-degree angle on the top and bottom, I have a 4-degree angle cut on one side of each one of these boards. So those will be the fronts. And these are going to be the two outside boards. And then these two boards here, these are the center supports. So they're the 2" by 13 and 7/8. They're also going to need the profile on the tops. And it's going to give us something like this. It's going to jigsaw that out, and it's going to allow for the seat to actually sit a little bit more comfortable. Then I'm going to take the two center seat support boards, transfer this onto these as well, and then jigsaw all of these out. And just like the two outside supports, the center support will also have this 4-degree angle on the front edge. Let's get these cut out. Now we need to get our front and back seat supports. You're going to need two of these that are 3 inches wide by 36 inches long. The only difference in those two is the front board, because the profiles actually go down in the front. We're going to need the front board to do the same thing. So using a table saw, got a 15-degree angle on the edge of the front board. And what this is going to do is whenever we line these two up, it's going to create a nice arched flow. Our two wide ones will go on the outside, and of course the narrower ones will go on the inside. What we're going to have to do is bring this profile up. Of course, I'll have some wood glue in there, and then I'm going to throw in a couple of brad nails. I'm going to do the same thing for the back and the rest of these parts. As far as the spacing goes, the two outside boards will be flush with the ends of the front and back boards, and then these two center supports, I'm going to install them at 1 foot and at 2 foot. But the main frame is pretty much put together as far as the seat support. Now I'm just going to throw some screws in this and then put my slats on. And with the screws, I'm just going to be using 1¼ deck screws, but I'm actually going to countersink these just a bit. So with our seat frame assembly all assembled, now it's time for our slats. So up until this point, everything that I've used has been 3/4 of an inch. So for our seat slats, we're going to be changing that up. These are 1/4 of an inch thick. You'll need 8 of these that are 36 inches long by 1 3/4 inches wide. But starting at the very front, I'm going to line it up with the edge, keep working my way back. And then for the spacing in between, we're going to go with 1/8 of an inch. This is actually another piece of scrap from the project that I thought was too thin for anything. It's not too thin for a jig. This is what our seat's looking like. So since we have square parts that are laid out into an arch, you can kind of feel the edges of your strips. So let's go ahead and sand those down just to make this good and smooth. Won't take a second. All right, and this is where we're at so far. I think that it's looking pretty awesome for a rotten piece of wood especially. So for the last piece that we're going to be making and the rest of our material that we have, we're going to be making the backrest. So we cut these parts a little earlier. They're the two pieces that we ended up putting this angle on, and they're going to be used for the sides of this back. Then we'll have the slats, which we'll get to here in a minute. And you're going to be needing 9 of these slats that are 2 inches wide by 18.5 inches long. Then the last two parts that we have are going to be the top and bottom slat supports. Each one of these are 2 inches wide by 34.5 inches long. On the table saw, I'm going to cut a rabbet right in the very center, 1/2 of an inch deep. That way, whenever we assemble all of this, it's going to lock all of our slats in. I'll start off by setting my blade height to 1/2 of an inch. So since our material is 1/4 of an inch thick, I'll be making 2 passes to remove 1/4 of an inch material 1/2 of an inch deep in the very center of my board. After my first cut, I'll just flip my board around and make a second cut, leaving me with 1/2 of an inch. Okay, so now that we have the notches cut, let's go ahead and assemble this back and then finish this project up. So if we want our backing to be exactly like this old one, if you notice the 2 diamonds cut out in the back, let's go ahead and cut those out on our slats too. So we're going to start off by kind of laying our slats out the way that we want them. On the old one, there's 3 slats in the very center, and then there's 2 diamonds, which is basically just 2 of these put together, and then 1 on each side. Let's go ahead and replicate that, and we'll be using these 4 to cut our diamonds. So to lay this material out for this diamond shape is actually really easy. We're going to measure down 7 inches and make a mark on the very edge, 8.5, make a mark, and then 10. And this is going to give us a 3-inch diamond. So at the 8.5 inch mark, which is the center one, I'm just going to take a straight edge and measure over 1 inch. So now you have your center line that's 1 inch out, mark below, and a mark above. Now we just need to connect the end of this center line to those 2 marks, and you have 1/2 of your diamond. But since we already have this measured out, let's go ahead and duplicate those marks onto our second board. Now you can use any type of straight edge to connect those marks. And It's as easy as that. We'll head over to the jigsaw, cut these out. So now that we have our little diamond slats cut, and then once I attach my second board, we will fine tune the spacing. I'm just going to make sure that my top and bottom is square to each other. Now we can fine tune our spacing. Our very first slat is going to be 2 1/8 of an inch in, and then the very last slat will also be 2 1/8 of an inch in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and nail those into place, and the two parts that have the diamonds in them, we're going to consider this just one part now, but our spacing will be 2 inches all the way across. So once everything is measured out and in place, we'll go ahead and install the brad nails for the rest of these. We'll install the two sides and then put all three of our parts together. I didn't do it. Looking good. Still these arms on. Okay, so to install these, I'm actually going to turn everything upside down. So the side with the angle cut is going to be the bottom. I'm going to make it flush all the way across. I want this to be my back, this side of it. So I'm just going to flip this over. And the reason for this is there's a little extra meat here on the sides, a little extra thickness, and I want that to be in the back. But basically I'm just lining this up with the edge. To hold everything into place, again, I'm going to throw some wood glue and then a couple brad nails, and then I'll install some screws. And there we have our back. Don't you tell me my diamonds are upside down. Well, that glue is going to be drying very quickly. I screwed up. Got one diamond down here and one diamond up here. And I've already had brad nails in all of this and no extra material. These two were supposed to be flipped around. Now I've got everything glued up. Already have my brad nails in. Do not have any more material, so I have to try to fix this before the glue dries. Well, I may have to drill them out. Well, luckily this was the back, if I can still get these to work. Basically what I've done is drilled out enough, because the countersink of the brad nail, drilled out enough to get some needle nose in there. Guess I'll probably have to use some wood filler. It's the only way I can think of to salvage this without cutting up here or breaking apart. So if there's one thing for sure with woodworking, not only do you get better at woodworking itself, but as time goes by, you get better at trying to figure out ways to solve problems and fix mistakes. This one would have been a lot easier if I had extra material, but I don't. I'm trying to get it at an angle. Not going to happen. I'm going to take this board out. Again, I think this is another sign that I should have been a dentist. That's what happens when you get in a hurry. Let's re-add some glue. Let's try this again. Diamond up. All right. Take my nails back out because I almost put a 1-inch nail through 3/4 inch material, which would have created a whole new set of problems. And as much as I don't want to, I have to use a little bit of wood filler. I'll have to let this dry and then I'll have to sand it. Mistakes were made. Hey, that'd be a good shirt. Try this again. Much better. It is what it is. Not we, me. I own this. Anytime you ever make a mistake, own it. It's the only way to do it. I messed up, did not take my time, put one of the diamonds upside down, and it was just enough so it was kind of, you could tell one was a little bit higher than the other. So took it all apart. The only way that I could figure out how without cutting new parts, because I don't have the material for it, re-glued it, and I'm going to go ahead and install my screws on the ends, and then finally we'll put all this together. Okay, so while I'm waiting for my back and my happy little accident to dry over there, let's go ahead and install our rocker arms to our seat. Okay, so the best way to do this, so you're not like on your work surface and trying to balance everything into place and all of that, it's going to be to put your seat on the ground. Okay, so the front is to my right here. It's very important. We do not want to install these backwards. Let's find the arm that is facing forward. Okay, so remember the long parts in the back here, as well as this curved part, because that's what will bolt into our back. So to install my first arm and rocker, I want to measure from underneath this arm down to the very bottom of this seat support, 9 1/4 of an inch. I want this angle to match my front angle, and 9 1/4 from the back. So once we get that into place, I'm just going to throw a clamp on. Now we'll install 2 bolts going through each one of the legs to attach the legs to our seat. So I'm going to be using 1/4 inch bolts for this. So my bolt placement is going to be 7 3/8 and 8 3/4. And we'll do that on both sides. And then from that mark, I'll be drilling my bolt holes 1 inch in. About my head, a screw. I'll be using 1/4 inch bolts that are 2 inches long with a washer and a lock nut on the inside. And then on the front side for the installation of the bolts, the height will be the same as the back, except we will only be going a 1/2 inch in. Okay, so now let's just repeat this for the opposite side. All right, now it is starting to look like a double rocking chair. So pretty cool, but let's go ahead and finish this up and get this back on. After a little TLC, can't hardly notice it.
Well, you can hardly even notice it.
I notice it because I did it. So the back will actually slide right in. So I'm going to take the bottom part of this angle and bring it to the bottom of this back seat support. I'm going to place my clamps on the bottom because first thing that we are going to be doing is running a bolt through our arm and into our back support. All right, so before I drill these holes for my bolts, it's kind of an awkward place to clamp because of the bolts that we have in and all that. So I'm going to throw a couple brad nails in just to hold this thing into place while we put our bolts in. So while we're working down here, change my mind. Let's go ahead and put our screws in. Then we'll put our bolts in. And again, this is just going to be to hold it at this angle. The bolt itself is going to be supporting this whole back. And then as you lean back, it's going to put pressure into this angle, into the seat. So the last step before we can actually put a finish on this thing is going to be to connect the back to the arms. And since the arm assembly is actually bolted to the seat, this is what's going to tie everything together. I'll be using a 1/4 inch bolt that is 2 inches long. And for this, since it's at a bit of an angle, I'm going to go ahead and counterbore for my bolt placement. I'm going to get it started, and then while the bit is turning, I'll rotate the drill to square. Once that counterbore is in, I'll finish it up with a 1/4 inch hole. Then we'll just repeat this for the opposite side. I'll go ahead and fill these plug holes. Then we're ready to give it a test. Just a quick tip whenever you're installing and cutting dowels. I'm actually using a metal business card here. But to keep from marking up your wood, you can use a thin piece of metal like this, or even a common playing card. If you're wondering about the blue tape on my pull saw, it's because these saws have teeth on both sides and some are offset. So if you're wanting to cut flush without the back teeth marking up your material, just throw on a little painter's tape. There she is. I think it turned out great. Now for the test. Not too shabby, especially for a piece of old wood with a hole rotted through it. So yes, I still need to put a finish on this, but this just goes to show you that we overlook possibilities every single day of creative builds. I mean, this was a rotten log. So just always remember, with a little bit of creativity and an open mind, the possibilities are endless. Now I just need somebody to sit with me, thickly.